Where's tu har min friend and welcome to another video. I'm back to provide you with some movie recommendations today. Because we've all read, ideally, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Some of you might have read The Witcher saga or Wiedźmin by Andrzej Sapkowski. Most of you might have read some books by Terry Pratchett and by George R. R. Martin, and all of these things have been made into either films or TV shows of the fantasy genre, and these things belong among the most popular and the most well-known films in the history of fantasy storymaking. The same thing could be said about, for example, Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's famously adapted from Robert E. Howard's stories about Conan the Cimmerian. But there are films, and these I appreciate a lot, that are purely and exclusively made to be movies, fantasy films with their original scripts, not adapted from a book, a comic book, a video game, and so on and so forth. I'm sure that in the near future we will see many video games, like fantasy video games, turned into movies, such as God of War. We've already seen a Warcraft movie. That was cool, that was fine. But I always appreciate the original material. And I've got 3 films for you here that you might have not heard about before, and you might have not seen before. And they are fantasy films, and they are my favorite fantasy films. Of course, I adore Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, and I adore Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and The Legend with Tom Cruise, and all the other, great fantasy films. All films that could be considered fantasy or half fantasy, like Indiana Jones. It's kind of fantasy, isn't it? Even a Star Wars fantasy when you think about it. It's about a young farm boy who is trained by a wizard to save a princess, right? Well, but my all-time favorite fantasy films that are originally fantasy, and I do very much recommend you watch them because they are magical, are The Dark Crystal. This is a DVD version, this is Blu-ray. The Dark Crystal is, if you haven't heard of it, there was a sequel of The Dark Crystal, or To The Dark Crystal, on Netflix, a TV show, The Age of Resistance, I think it was called. I haven't watched the entire series yet, but that's fine. It is a puppet movie made by Jim Henson. He is the very guy who invented the Muppets. And if you watch a film or a TV show from the 1980s and there are puppets in it, it's like 90% certain that Jim Henson worked on it. A very skilled and genius guy, not only a puppet maker and a puppet master, but a skilled filmmaker and a writer. And this film is such a pure fantasy that when you watch it, or at least when I watch it, I get completely drawn and drowned in the story and in the world and in the story world building, that I instantly forget that I live in the primary world, in the grey and dark and grim reality. So what it is about, it is of course set in a fictitious fantasy world, and let's say there are races of beings, 3 main races of beings. There are the Gelflings, these are those little elf-looking guys. There are the Mystics, which are like the good monk slash Jedi-like creatures. And then there are Skeksis, and they're the bad guys who look like these evil vultures. These are those. And the story revolves around the Dark Crystal, which is like a magical, crystal that provides, life and life energy to the entire world. And it's basically about a quest to save the Dark Crystal. One of the best storytelling devices of any fantasy story is the quest somewhere to save something, right? But the annotation, the description of the film might describe it a little bit better than I do. So the official description on the Blu-ray film goes, in another time, the Dark Crystal, a source of balance and truth in the universe, was shattered, dividing the world into two factions, the wicked Skeksis and the peaceful mystics. Now, as the convergence of the three suns approaches, the crystal must be healed, or darkness will reign forevermore. It's up to Jin, the last of her race, to fulfill the prophecy that a Gelfling will return the missing shard to the crystal and destroy the Skeksis' evil empire. But will young Jin's courage be any match for the unknown dangers that await him? Revisit this masterful fantasy epic from the brilliant imagination of Jim Henson. As I said, a purely, clearly fantasy about a little elf or a Gelfling saving the Dark Crystal and thus saving the world from the evil Skeksis or the evil Skeksis Empire. Absolutely fantastic. I love this film. I've loved it for years. And I've seen the first couple of episodes of the sequel. It wasn't that bad. Some people say it's woke, but I saw like the first 3 episodes. It wasn't that woke to me, so I don't know. I will finish it. It's on Netflix, and then I'll make a review about it. And I've got Wizards by Ralph Bakshi. And Ralph Bakshi was, or still is, a revolutionary filmmaker in animation. He made one of the first animated films for adults, like purely and clearly for adults, like The Wizards or Fritz the Cat. He even made the first adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. The animated Lord of the Rings that some of you might have heard of was made by Ralph Bakshi. And he's very famous for combining live action, like shooting of a film, with animation. So he shot like people, real life people, and then he like made just, shadows of them. I'm not very skilled in movie making or animation, so what I'm saying now is very layman-like description. And then he somehow made them into shadows, and then he like projected them somewhere, and then he made it into an animation. Bah! So some of you who are good at animation, or maybe who studied animation, who make animated movies, you might, describe this process to me in more detail. But what this is about, this is really extremely and very much inspired by Tolkien when you watch it. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world, which has evolved in a fantasy secondary world, right? But the past of this world is actually our world. And our world was destroyed in, a nuclear apocalypse. And from this apocalypse, a new world arose. Like Ragnarok, right? One world ends, the other one is born from the ashes of the old one. And from this apocalypse, a couple of, races were born. So the magical people, like elves and dwarves and fairies, mainly, this is about fairies mainly, get reborn. They wake up again and rule over the world. And then there are mutants, who of course get created due to, the apocalyptic ash falling to the ground. And there are 2 wizards. One is a good wizard, the other one is a bad wizard. And they are more like the evil wizard is definitely the leader of the bad, people, like the mutants and the orcs and the goblins, right? And the good wizard is really not a leader of the good people, but an advisor of the main hero, let's say, the archetype of the wise old man, right? And the bad fraction are using technology. And the bad wizard is really very much similar to Saruman from The Lord of the Rings. And he has this army that's very, very, very close to Nazis. And he even shows them old recordings of the Nazi army from Germany from the 1940s. And shows them and teaches them how to make weapons, how to make tanks, how to make guns. And how to use technology for warfare. To defeat the fairies and the elves. And the good wizard is actually his brother. And the good wizard, along with the good people, and the fairies and the elves and so on, are obviously trying to save the world from the mutants and the evil wizard. And it's about the two fractions fighting, really, the good versus the evil. It's animated, once again, used this sort of very much Ralph Bakshi style of animation, and might be, once again, better if I read the description for you. One of the most ambitious and inventive films from legendary animator Ralph Bakshi, Wizards is a dazzling fantasy adventure set in a post-apocalyptic Earth where the technology has been outlawed after nuclear disaster. The film follows the story of Avatar, the kindly, eccentric sorcerer ruler of Montagar, a rainbow paradise inhabited by elves and fairies. Avatar's evil brother Black Wolf dominates Scorch, a bleak land of goblins and wraiths. When the power-hungry Black Wolf attacks Montagar, Avatar, accompanied by only by a spirited young woman and a courageous elf, must enter the darkness of Scorch to save his world. Stunningly designed and thrilling dramatized, this unforgettable cult classic is presented in a breathtaking new high-definition transfer because it's Blu-ray. So, as I said, these two films, The Dark Crystal and Wizards, are definitely the best fantasy films, in my opinion, that are original films, with original scripts, original idea, not being adapted from anything. And just quickly, because I don't want to take up much of your time, is The Fire and Ice. This is a German version. So, Feuer und Eis. Once again, a pure high fantasy made by Ralph Bakshi. Again, his original fantastic animation. And I love this cover, by the way. I know, Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer. So these are, I might make a more detailed video next time about this, but this time it shall suffice. Let's show all the 3 Blu-rays here. My 3 recommendations for 3 great fantasy films that are original films, fantasy films, that you should watch it and rewatch it like a million times, is The Dark Crystal, the original one, Wizards, and The Fire and Ice. So Jim Henson, Ralph Bakshi. So yeah, that will be all from me. Let me know in the comments down below if you've seen the films, if you like them, if you're going to watch them after my recommendations, and all about that. And that will be all. Thank you very much for watching, and Namaste.